Hello, my name is Natalie Chambers, and today I'm going to be presenting on a poem that was presented in the documentary series August 28th called Bury Me in a Free Land by Francis Harper. Now, short summary. In the documentary, as I stated, it is from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, wherein a bunch of celebrity guests of color discuss the cultural significance of the date, August 28th. Now, the holiday is not a particular holiday or occasion, but rather a common date where events of significance to people of color have occurred for some reason, whether or not, I don't know why. For example, Hurricane Katrina occurred on August 28th, 2004. Each guest presents a story about the day and then ends with that same person reciting a poem or another piece of literature, I think mostly poems, and in doing so portray historical characters from each time period presented that they talk about. So for the one that this poem covers, it covers the date August 28, 1833. This date commemorates the Slavery Abolition Act getting enacted in Great Britain. This act basically, to an extent, freed the slaves in Great Britain long before America did. However, the guest narrator on this one, Glenn Turnman, discusses how the Slavery Abolition Act laid the groundwork for the Emancipation Proclamation in America later on. Upon ending his statements, he shifts into the character that is portrayed in his tale. A recently freed slave around that time period, and he begins reciting lines from Harper's poem. In the poem's opening lines, the narrator states that when they die, they wish to be buried wherever or whatever spot. They don't really have a preference. They want to make it among Earth's humblest graves. And it likely connects to Turnman's character as a recently freed slave who desires nothing more than just be buried in a peaceful grave where no one will bother him, as represent a metaphor for his newfound freedom. However, he does make one specific request. He does not want to be buried in a land where there are any slaves. They don't want to be included among slaves upon their death. That is the last thing that the character desires. They want to be buried somewhere where slavery maybe not didn't exist, but at least where no slaves lived there. Moving right along, Turnman surprisingly jumps around a few lines. He picks up the poem at stanza 5 from where he started at stanza 1. In this part, it contains at least one memory of their time as a slave, as well as indications of likely PTSD from both the character and the narrator. The narrator recollects that they would shudder at the start if they heard bloodhounds arriving to go and how do I put this? Basically hunt down and track any slaves who would manage to escape. This represents not only a painful memory, but also the fact that they were humans and not things to be hunted by dogs. But they unfortunately were. And this adds to his identity as someone who is a freed slave who maintains all the memories they have from their basically previous life. Similar to the previous stanza, stanza 6 too represents a painful memory. Only this time, it contains a little more remorse from both the narrator and the character. This one references a memory of young girls being separated from their mothers. It doesn't say explicitly, but I would assume that many of them were not only sold into slavery themselves, away from their families, but also, quote, bartered and sold for their youthful charms, which does not paint a pretty picture. I don't want to say it, but it doesn't sound good for them. So, both Truman's character and the narrator express strong desire to stop that trade and help those poor girls get to safety or go back to their mothers, but they can't. They're like stuck between a rock and a hard place. They want to do something, but their positions as slaves prevents them from doing anything other than watching and seeing what's going on, which is painful in and of itself. Finally, the last stanza to close out Truman's segment is stanza 7. It contains further emphasis of the narrator's peaceful burial request, plus a little something else. The narrator states, "I would sleep, dear friends, where bloated might, can rob no man of his dearest right," which means even in death, they still desire to be not disturbed and just want to move on into the peaceful afterlife. They want acknowledgement that despite the fact that they were slaves, it becomes meaningless and a moot point upon their death. They just want to be peaceful souls moving on to a peaceful afterlife with no repercussions or anything else holding them back, no matter who they were or what they were in life. Now, this is a little bit long, but I felt I wanted to keep it in here. Back to my earlier statement, I was kind of surprised when Truman decided to jump from the first stanza all the way to 5. And as I read more into it, I thought that it was for emphasizing the points in the poem. He wanted to summarize what Harper wanted to get across, but also some of the most powerful imagery in the piece. Among that was those daughters getting separated from their mothers, witnessing some of those same girls getting unfortunately auctioned off, and the genuine trauma sustained and suffered from their times as slaves. I think, even though the jump might be a little bit jarring, I think it does its job by really getting all that across. And even though I think it could have done the same job or something similar if the whole poem were read aloud, but I think the shortened version did a much better job of getting it across in a way that made it stronger, I think. Now, there's not necessarily related to all of it, but I did find some cool historical pieces and pictures of things, such as the one on the far left is, I didn't know what it was at first. I thought it was just a cool, political cartoon, but I found out that it's actually the official medallion of the Anti-Slavery Society. And then the picture in the middle here is a parade of freed slaves. And upon further inspection, it's actually a parade that occurred in Barbados, but I felt it still expressed the freedom that, like, at least like a lot of a lot of what the mindsets of the slaves were in Great Britain once that act was put into place. And then finally, on the far right is at least what I think is like a drawing or the actual document for the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, which I thought was kind of neat. And you guys are more excited. Right. Thank you, and I hope I did okay in explaining all this. I kind of rambled, but I tried.